I would like to invite you to go ahead with your lecture. So guys, this will be a 30-minute lecture, and it will be followed with a Q&A. So you can ask anything relevant to the lecture, you can ask anything related to Jindal, you can ask anything related to academia. So all the best, Sandy.
Thank
Hope
you.
to see you after 30-35 minutes. Bye.
Sure, sure. Thank you, Aditya, for now giving me the platform to move into the discussion. So, as might have already been communicated with you, I want to talk about this topic, which is a huge topic. I cannot cover it in 30 minutes or 35 minutes. I need like 2 weeks to cover this topic in its fullest way. But I'll try to give a quick snapshot of what I believe students going to study constitutional law should know, right? And this is where I hope this discussion will sort of tell us how to learn the law without just looking at the text of it, but going slightly behind of it and looking at the larger background, looking at how each development in the law, when you finally put it in paper all together, what links do you get, right? So it's about not just knowing, okay, I know these five cases, these five Supreme Court judgments, doesn't make anything out of it, right? You need to know what is the connection between those five judgments. What are the unique parallels that we can draw from those judgments, right? How can we relate those five judgments of 2000s to the judgments in 2020s or something back in the history, right? So hopefully this discussion will sort of throw light on those ways of thinking about the law, right? And how to sort of approach the law with a more holistic, view rather than a textbookish view of the law. Right? So the topic that I wanted to focus was transparency and accountability of democratic institutions in India. Now, you must have definitely heard about these concepts like separation of powers, checks and balances, rule of law. These are huge, large concepts of constitutional significance. But these large concepts are composed by several minor conceptions. And two of such conceptions are the focus of my discussion here: transparency and accountability. Right? So, democratic institutions. A democratic institution like the Supreme Court, like the Parliament, like the government, or like the political parties, right? Their transparency, level of transparency, their level of accountability that they have towards the people or towards every other, instrument in the society can be understood easily by assessing the sanctity of the processes within these institutions as well as the way they carry out their functions in the public. So my focus here will be on political parties and the government on one side, and the judiciary headed by the Supreme Court on the other side. So we'll try to take a look at how the procedures concerning the functioning of these democratic stakeholders have been checked by each other to keep them accountable. We'll also have to see if they have been successful, but that's probably for a different day of discussion. And hopefully, in this course of this discussion, we'll also try to understand some of the hypocrisies that are involved in and around the implementation of constitutional law, right? So these hypocrisies are also part of the law, I would say, or the implementation of it at least, right? So going straight into the specific content, first we'll try to understand through certain case law how the Supreme Court tried to regulate the how do I say the unruliness of political parties, and how through these judgments they try to sanitize. I think sanitize is an apt word in these current times, right? So how these judgments try to sanitize the dirty areas of politics, which are filled by money, power, and muscle, right? So let's take a look at a few judgments and a few Supreme Court cases like that. Note it down first. There is this very important judgment of the Supreme Court in Union of India versus Association of Democratic Reforms, a 2002 Supreme Court judgment delivered by a three-judge bench consisting of Justices M.B. Shah, B.P. Singh, and H.K. Seema. So three-judge bench, a very significant bench strength. The issue here was whether the Election Commission of India, all of you would know the Election Commission of India, right, which is the primary body that is engaged in the process of conducting elections in India, right? So Election Commission of India, the question was whether the Election Commission of India can direct the political parties and of course the candidates who represent these political parties in elections to submit records about the following information: about the criminal cases that are pending against them, about the criminal cases in which they have been convicted in the past, right? So pending criminal cases and past criminal background, their information about their assets and liabilities, financial assets and liabilities, right? And their educational details, educational qualifications and details. So can the Election Commission require the political parties and their candidates to furnish these records containing all this information before they stand for an election? And the Supreme Court held that, right to know of electoral, the right to know of citizens, you and me, who will vote in elections, are right to know about what? About the qualifications, about the background of the candidate is of paramount importance in a democratic system. And the Supreme Court associated this right under Article 19. Article 19, if you know, talks about your freedom of speech and several other kinds of freedoms. So what they did was, what the Supreme Court did was, they first said that voting is a form of freedom of speech. What is freedom of speech? You are expressing your thought. Your freedom to express your opinion, your thought. So voting is like that, right? Where you are expressing your opinion about a candidate. I like Rahul Gandhi and not Narendra Modi, or vice versa. So that is also expressing your opinion. How do you express your opinion in an electoral system? By voting. Therefore, the act of voting is part of the freedom that you have in Article 19. And for that freedom to have, there is also a parallel right under 19, which the Supreme Court has carved out, which is the right to know. See, if you have to vote for someone, you have to make an informed decision, right? I mean, at least that's what we ideally expect. Yes, in India, we do have voting behavior which is based on caste and other factors, which do not have anything to do with merit. But ideally, that should not be the case, right? Ideally, it should be on merit. And supposedly, having a background about having knowledge about the background, criminal background, financial background, and educational background, for the court, it was important for the people, we the people, to make an informed choice. So, transparency of the relevant political facts are relevant for the voters to make a informed opinion. This is how the Supreme Court came to a conclusion that Election Commission can certainly require the candidates before they stand for elections to submit their information about past criminal convictions, pending criminal cases, assets and liabilities that they have, and their educational qualifications. So the courts, the theory that they used was that, ever since 1990s or late 1980s and 1990s throughout, the influx of money and muscle, right, into the field of politics has been extensive, which is why people with severe criminal records have come into the parliament after getting elected. So the court said this purity of elections have been dirtied by the pollution caused by the monetary and other forms of corruption by the political class. And one way to sort of try and put a break on that, the only one way to sort of sanitize that impure political arena is to ensure that people get all this information which was otherwise not available for them, which was otherwise suppressed, so that they hopefully make an informed choice to not elect, people with heavy criminal background, etc. So in your mind, please keep away the effectiveness of it. These rulings have not had a positive effect on the ground, because 2019 Lok Sabha election produced the highest number of people with with criminal records in the history of Indian elections. That's a different discussion. But what this shows is how the Supreme Court tried to regulate the transparency of political parties and their candidates. So you are being transparent, right, when you disclose all of this, and the Election Commission will put up all these details on the Election Commission's website, so all of us can go and access it. So that makes political parties and candidates more transparent, and hopefully, because of that transparency, accountable during the voting day. This is what happened. So here you see the Supreme Court taking charge of the political party, right? Now the Parliament is smart. Immediately after this case, they passed a law, or they made an amendment to the main important electoral legislation that we have in India, called as the Representation of the People Act 1951. They made an amendment to this act, which for all practical purposes nullified the Supreme Court judgment in Union of India versus Association of Democratic Republics. And they immediately got that law. So again, there was another round of litigation. This time, another NGO called as the People's Union for Civil Liberties, they went to the Supreme Court challenging this new law that the Parliament brought immediately after the 2002 case that we just discussed. So PUCL said that, you know what, Supreme Court in the previous case had held that we voters have the right to know, which is part and parcel of the freedom of voting, which is categorized now as a freedom under the Article 90. So once a Supreme Court judgment has held something to be part of a fundamental rights category, the Parliament cannot come and make a law to remove that. Here again, the Supreme Court, again a 3-judge bench, again consisting of Justice M.B. Shah again. M.B. Shah was again a part of the previous judgment. But apart from M.B. Shah, we had P.V. Reddy, P. Venkatarama Reddy, and Justice D.M. Dharmadhikari. They again reiterated whatever the previous judgment had said, and held that the Parliament cannot exercise its legislative powers to violate fundamental rights which the court has already declared. So in the previous case, the court has done that. The fundamental right to know about the candidates is part of Article 19. The fundamental right to not know everything about the candidate, by the way. Yeah? It's not that, oh, I want to know what this candidate has for breakfast every day. That can't be the right to know. Only relevant political facts. What are the facts that are relevant for you to make an informed choice of voting? Height of the candidate is unimportant as far as voting is concerned. It would have been important if it was a basketball match that you're selecting the team for, but not for voting. So only these factors like educational qualifications, criminal record, and assets and liabilities. So again, in the People's Union for Civil Liberties versus Union of India case, which happened the year after that, immediately 2003, the Supreme Court reiterated, as I said, reiterated all the points in the previous judgment and said that every citizen has the right to freedom of speech, which includes the right to information. And for a healthy democracy, transparency in information about the candidates is significant, right? So this right to know was crucial to have a well-informed citizenry that makes a conscious choice in the electoral process, thereby reaffirming the Supreme Court's stance on controlling the political parties and making them more transparent. So that's the second judgment. I mean, fast forwarding 10 years after that, 2003 se 10 years, 2013, third judgment, Lily Thomas versus Union of India, 2013 Supreme Court. Two-judge bench decision this time, consisting of Justice A.K. Patnaik and Justice S.J. Mukhopadhyay. Okay? Now, here the deal was, now your Representation of People's Act 1951 disqualifies an MP or an MLA if he or she has been convicted in a criminal case. So, for example, if I am currently a member of the parliament and there is a criminal case that is going on against me in the trial court, the trial court convicts me for that particular offense and punishes me for, let's say, 5 years of imprisonment. Okay? Now, Section 8 of the Representation of People's Act comes and says that Sandeep Suresh will now be disqualified. That is, you will now cease to be a member of the parliament because of your conviction. This is something that we have in the Representation of People's Act. But there was this catch that the politicians had inserted in that law for themselves. That is, a catch that sort of utilizes the loopholes of our system. What the law said was, but if after that conviction, Sandeep Suresh, the MP, the convicted MP, files an appeal against that judgment before the higher court, and till the time that appeal is pending, you shall not be disqualified. So what did people used to do? Whosoever got convicted, if at all, whichever MP got convicted, they used to file an immediate appeal, which then used to take its nice time in the court. By the time 2 Lok Sabha would have been constituted. So that flaw that we have in the practical system of delay in the courts, delay in disposing of appeals, used to be utilized by the convicted member of parliament. So they used to escape that disqualification because of this loophole that they had. Getting it? So this provision of the Representation of People's Act was challenged by the petitioner Lily Thomas. Lily Thomas is, by the way, a wonderful, and if I mentor any one of you, I will talk to you a lot about Advocate Lily Thomas, a very inspirational figure, but I don't have the time right now for that. So Lily Thomas challenged that by saying that this is, going behind the back and saving yourself, needs to be struck down. This is making the law of disqualification ineffective. So the Supreme Court again agreed with the petitioners. Supreme Court said purity of politics needs to be maintained. Purity of the parliament needs to be maintained. Such convicted MPs should not be allowed to sit in that temple of democracy, as they call it. So the Supreme Court said what? This provision which allows this appeal wala loophole is unconstitutional. They struck it down. And they said that a convicted member of parliament, the moment he or she is convicted, would suffer immediate disqualification and would cease immediately to be a member of the parliament. Right? So prior to this judgment, you had members of parliament who were convicted, as I said, would file an appeal and then go about their regular business, which included being elected again and holding seats. So with this judgment, that practice has now been stopped, which is why your Lalu Prasad Yadav is now in jail. Only for this particular reason, that Lily Thomas was the Union of India did that. So again, the Supreme Court is gripping on the accountability of lawmakers. One more final judgment, which is very, very significant. I think it tops all these judgments, which is Ram Babu Singh Thakur versus Sunil Arora and others. Judgment was delivered on February 2020, last year. Yeah, in and around the same time last year. A bench including Justice Rohinton Nariman and Justice Ravindra Bhatt. Okay. What did they do? They passed a few directions in this case. Now, if you know the Supreme Court, once you will know the Supreme Court of India, they have this habit of issuing directions a lot. Okay? They will keep issuing directions to different authorities in this country. Anyway, so they issued certain directions to political parties, and very fascinating. So around six directions were there, but due to paucity of time, I will not go into all the six. But let me list out 2 or 3, the most significant ones. First one, the bench directed political parties to upload on their website. So parties have their own websites, right? The Indian National Congress has their own website. BJP has their own website. So they have to upload on their website what? Detailed information regarding the individuals who they have selected as candidates for the upcoming elections. So detailed information about what? About all the pending criminal cases against them. Nature of those offenses for which cases are pending. In which court are they pending? What is the case number of that particular case? What stage of the criminal trial is it? Right? Is it the initial stage? Is it the last stage? All these minute details. Not just the answer that, okay, I have 3 criminal cases pending against me. No. Each and every minute detail about all the specific cases that are pending against me. Political parties have to upload it on their website. So they already do it, but not in so much details. They submit their record to the Election Commission, all the previous judgments that we discussed. But now they have to put it also on their website so that it is more easily accessible for people who might not know Election Commission website, but they might know their party's website. Now it's not just, the second direction is more fascinating. It's not just directing the political parties to give out details about their candidates and their criminal records. Parties also had another obligation under this judgment. You tell us what is the reason why you selected this chap who has a huge criminal background like this. Essentially asking the parties, didn't you get anyone better to stand as a candidate? So give detailed reasons also. Write an essay, basically. So it's like an exam sheet, exam question paper. Why did you select Sandeep Suresh as your candidate despite him having 15 pending criminal cases, and that to serious offenses? Attempt to murder, conspiracy, and all of that. Didn't you get anyone better? So typical dialogue like that. So they have to put it down in their website. And the court, the third direction, the court said, this hits the very practical reality of our Indian elections. The court said, winnability cannot be the sole ground for selecting that person. Meaning, the political party can't write as the reason that we selected him despite his criminal record because he's a winnable candidate. He will easily win. This is the typical scenario, right? So the court said that can't be the sole reason. There has to be some legitimate reason about his quality, his leadership, and all of that. Very large scale expectation. Anyway, the practical utility of it is one side again, as I said. But if you look at it, look at what the Supreme Court is doing, right? The Supreme Court is trying to grip the political parties to make them very transparent and very accountable. In one way, if you look at it, for us, yeah, it seems good. The trend is very good, right? We are getting to know more about these candidates and political parties because of the Supreme Court. One could say that. From our perspective, this looks fantastic, right? So here's the judiciary keeping a check on the political parties and the executive, the government, to increase their transparency, to increase their account. Now, the interesting side is, let us look at the Supreme Court now. These are the only cases that I would like to sort of point out. Let us look at the other side. Supreme Court has been, through all these judgments, by the way, these are not the only judgments, there are several other judgments also, has been, eloquently, talking about transparency, purity of elections, the need for accountability of political parties and all of that. But let's look at what the Supreme Court has done to ensure its own transparency and accountability. That's where, remember I said, hypocrisies can be found out. Hopefully, this part of the discussion will sort of give us an insight into that. First issue, I don't know if all of you would know this, but let me tell you very briefly. The Supreme Court, of course, judges are appointed to the Supreme Court. There is no election of the Supreme Court judges. They are appointed. Final appointing authority is the President of India. But what is the process of appointment? There has been a lot of discussions. So in 2015, the Parliament passed an amendment to the Constitution saying that the President will appoint judges to the Supreme Court based on the recommendations made by a committee called as the commission called as the National Judicial Appointments Commission, NJAC. Okay. NJAC consisting of 3 Supreme Court judges, including the Chief Justice, Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition, and several other eminent jurists. Okay, so it's a diverse body, right? People from the executive are there, people from the Parliament are there, people from the judiciary are there, other independent people are there. So it's a mixed body, and always such a mixed body, which has a consultative process of appointment, is always a preferred system of democratic appointment. So, a body like the Supreme Court, to even a body like the Election Commission. But the Supreme Court struck it down. Supreme Court struck it down by saying that no, this is not happening. They used a very weird theory called primacy of judiciary. They said judiciary is the primary authority to be in charge of appointments of judges. So they themselves will decide amongst themselves that, okay, this person A will get appointed next, after that person B. Judges amongst themselves will decide. Is that a democratic and is that an open system? Not at all. In a democratic system, appointments to such a body, to one of the most important judicial organs, Supreme Court, cannot be made as an in-house process. It's not some cooperative society that is, working. Right? It's not even an association that is there to play sports. We have these sports associations and all of that. No, it's the Supreme Court of India. And this is in contradiction to the Constitution, by the way. Constitution originally said the President shall appoint. President is a representative of the executive, shall appoint in consultation with the Chief Justice of India. So a member of the executive will consult a member of the judiciary, and then together they will appoint a judge. So there is a mutual checks and balances. And that's the entire idea of separation of powers, that all powers should not be with one individual or just one institution. It should be shared so that we can keep a check, so that you are accountable. Supreme Court did that. And that's how they have the system called as collegium system. Collegium of 5 senior most judges of the Supreme Court will decide who will get elevated to the Supreme Court of India. And their decision, this decision of this collegium, is apparently binding on the President of India. Right? So this is one instance where you can see that an area where the I got it. The area where the Supreme Court should have been, open to make it more transparent, its appointment process more transparent. They refuse to do so, despite the constitutional scheme being otherwise, despite the constitutional scheme being in favor of a mutually checked system, a consultative appointment process rather than a in-house appointment process. That's one thing. And also, okay, fine. There was limited transparency at least for 2 years during Justice Deepak Mishra's tenure as the Chief Justice of India, where the collegium's decision, resolutions passed by the collegium used to be uploaded on the Supreme Court website. That has been done again. Now, if you look at the website, I don't get to see any of the collegium resolutions that are coming these days. We don't get to know why a judge has been appointed. We don't get to know what are the reasons why a judge has been not elevated to the Supreme Court. It's that opaque. So the transparency that they are fighting for, as far as political parties are concerned, they are not doing it within their, within their house. Another example is, so we talked about declaring assets and liabilities of political parties before the Election Commission, right? The first two cases, 2002 and 2003 cases. After this discussion, or maybe if you can open it online, open the Supreme Court website, or just Google assets and liabilities Supreme Court judges. See how many judges have revealed their assets and liabilities despite it being mandatory. The latest I checked before this lecture, half an hour before this lecture, was 5 judges, and one of them has retired already. I don't want to know about him anymore. So essentially 4 to 5 judges out of the 34 that we have there, or 32 that we have there currently, only they have released their assets and liabilities. But parallelly, they will target the political parties and their candidates by saying that, you know what, you declare your assets before the Election Commission. If you don't do so, we will do something against it. We will void your election. They can do that also. So this is another area. The one more example that I can sort of give you is how processes. I started with by saying that, I'll end it soon. I started by saying that, processes, the sanctity, the purity of the processes that the institutions have, right, is what will give us a sense about their transparency, their accountability. And one of the finest instances to show the Supreme Court's lack of transparency is, all of you must have definitely heard, at least, if not knowing more in detail, about the former Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi and the sexual harassment allegations. Let me use a lawyerly word of allegations that were raised against him by his employee. This happened while he was the Chief Justice of India. Now, if there is an allegation against me, is it right for me to decide that case? No, right? For example, in schools, when your teacher corrects your exam answer sheet, there is this idea of re-evaluation, right? For re-evaluation, do you send it to the same teacher? No, you send it to another teacher or a committee of teachers. Why do we do so? Because if I am going to decide my innocence and guilt, what do you think I will do? Will I hold myself guilty? 99.9999% of human beings are not pure souls, right? Therefore, they won't. Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi presided over a bench which heard this particular sexual harassment matter at the Supreme Court. That is the epitome of showing how your processes are so impure that we call in you will learn natural justice, which is a significant aspect of administrative law and constitutional law. Natural justice, which ensures that nobody shall be a judge in their own cause. That if there is a case against you, you shall not be a judge. Somebody else should judge, so as to get an independent system. So this goes on to sort of show how hypocritic the implementation of constitutional principles like transparency, accountability, natural justice, checks and balances, separation of powers are when you talk about the Supreme Court in comparison to the other organs, right? One more example with which I'll end is that when the Ayodhya judgment came, whether the judgment is right or wrong, forget it. But if you look at the judgment, there are no names of the judges given. Usually there are judges' names given. In the Ayodhya judgment, there are no judges' names. And that's again showing at your own will, you will decide when to be transparent, when not to be transparent. But at the same time, you will ask other parties to be. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the framer of the chief architect, not the only one, the chief architect of the Constitution of India, had said that however brilliant the Constitution that we have created might be, if it is going to be run by bad people, it's going to be a bad Constitution. On the other hand, even if we have made a very bad Constitution, but if the lot who is going to implement it are good people, the Constitution will also be good. This shows a lot about how the way we conduct ourselves, the way the processes are designed and implemented in these democratic institutions are so important, so as to ensure that the idiosyncrasies of individuals are very different, right? You can't expect uniformity from every individual, but from processes we can. So these processes should be transparent and accountable in order to satisfy all these constitutional principles. So as Ambedkar said, we need to have good people, in all these institutions to ensure that the so-called constitutional principles that we study in classrooms are implemented on the ground properly, right? So with that, I will end this discussion. I know I've gone slightly beyond my time frame. So that's all. Thank you so much. And I'll be happy to take in any questions if any students have.
Yeah, hi Sandeep. That was a lovely insight when it comes to the basic pillars of our constitution, and very well explained. In fact, one question which I was personally interested in, and simultaneously, you guys can ask, write your questions on the live chat option which you guys have. So, one question which I would want you to answer is. So the hypocrisy which the judiciary seems to be a victim of uh, is slightly unique in a way that there's no solution, there's no tangible solution to this problem. Like, where do you go? You can't now NJAC of course was sought to be a solution, but then there are a lot of bottlenecks and a lot of drawbacks in NJAC as well, because again, if the parliament, if the politicians are being involved, especially when it is the leader of opposition and one of the prime ministers, so the prominent parties ka sabse important leader is being involved, of course politically the appointments might be motivated. So how do you see, or how do you suggest a reform for an exceptional organ which judiciary is can happen? Like, do you see that happening? Do you see judiciary unshackling from this brittle, antiquated fetter which it seems to have fallen prey to?
So that's a very, very tough question for me to answer, and I don't think I am eligible or qualified to answer that in one stroke. But again, I can give you an example, right? And that's what I ended with, that individuals cannot be controlled. And Aditya Shekhar and Sandeep Suresh will be different, will act differently when different discretionary powers are upon us, right? We can't expect, that's human nature, we can't expect uniformity. From what we can expect uniformity is from procedures. So laying down as many procedures as possible. And I know for a fact that not everything can be written down in text, but there are situations. For example, one instance out of the discussions that I had, the Ranjan Gogoi example, right? The reason why Ranjan Gogoi could sit on that bench hearing his own case is because we don't have a set of rules within the Supreme Court rules which talks about what happens when such an allegation comes against the Chief Justice of India, right? Or if you take a look at it again in a corporate context, right? usually the head of the HR is the one who will decide all the disputes and resolve all the disputes, right? Any issues between the employees, etc. What is if the complaint is against the head of the HR? Some corporates are also silent on that. Similar is the situation with the Chief Justice of India and his or her liability. And I have to say his because that's unfortunately been the situation, and we will kill away the situation to have a her Chief Justice in 2027. That's not going to happen because of the delay. Anyway, so laying down an in-house procedure to decide, okay, when allegation like this comes against the CGI, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, these are the processes that we have. See, if that set of rules are there, then an individual is bound by it. But unfortunately, the problem here is, Shekhar, that unfortunately the parliament cannot make these in-house rules for the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court itself has to do it. Right? So, for example, what's the irony is that the difficulty is that a political party themselves would not reveal the criminal records of their candidates to you until and unless it is forced.
Right.
Until unless you catch them by the collar.
Right.
But the problem is you can't catch the judges by their collars because of the constitutional scheme that we have. Which is why, unfortunately, my only hope is that the judges themselves undertake that exercise, which, again, they have been hypocritical about. They said that, after they struck down the NJSC, they said that we will make collegium system more transparent. Forget being more transparent, it has only become more opaque. As I said, collegium resolutions were there on the website pehle, but now it's not even there. So what are they doing about it? I don't have an answer to that until and unless, of course, each situation and each issue will have a separate answer. But the point, whatever I say, doesn't matter. The reform has to come from within.
Right.
Yeah.
And especially
procedure and reforming the procedure is the only way to control individuals.
Yeah, but when I see likes of Justice Chandrachud, when I see likes of Justice Nariman, my hope and my respect is simply reignited. I mean, the intellect, the kind of vision they have. I'm sure that there is, that silver lining would definitely pan out, and somehow, there is something significant which
Hopefully,
is
Justice Chandrachud has a 2-year tenure as a Chief Justice of India,
absolutely,
which no other Chief Justice has received in the last many years, except for his dad, who was Chief Justice for about 6 to 8 years, I believe.
Right.
So therefore,
I think it was 8 years. His dad, and he was the longest serving Chief Justice of India, if I'm not wrong.
Who? D.Y. Chandrachud.
Y.B. Chandrachud.
Y.B. was, yes.
Yes.
But in the today's times, 2 years is a lot of time for a Chief Justice.
Absolutely.
In order to bring in these administrative reforms within the judiciary. So let's hope. I don't have much hope, but yeah, let's see.
Right. So a few questions now. Aditi asks, is the collegium system similar to what is present in the USA? Sandy, if you can throw some light.
Not at all is my answer, right? What do you see in the US, right? US, of course, has a very different appointment processes. The President of the United States appoint the Supreme Court judges upon the confirmation by the Senate. Their Senate is equal to our houses in the Parliament. Okay, they have the Congress and then they have the Senate. So equal to your Rajya Sabha, Lok Sabha. So the Senate has to approve the nominee, given by the President, right? Which is why, whenever a nomination happens on YouTube, they telecast it for us, on television for the Americans, but on YouTube, everyone in this world can watch how the senators in America, coming from each state, grill that Supreme Court nominee, asking him or her questions about constitutional law, asking him or her questions about their perceptions about the constitutions, their knowledge, giving them hypothetical facts and telling them to decide it. I mean, give a short decision. If that is happening there live, and somebody sitting here in Sonipat, Haryana can watch Justice, anyone getting nominated on YouTube, and that happens like 4 hours, 5 hours on 2 different days, by the way. So therefore, there is no comparison by any means at all. Collegium is as I call it, after 4 p.m., whenever the judges retire from their courtroom, the 5 more senior judges will sit together around the coffee table. They will decide, this person is good, that person is bad. Let this person come out. This is how the appointment process is over a coffee table. You and me get to know it? No, not at all. So therefore, not at all. My answer.
Right.